Welcome to EPG Pathshala. This is your course on The American Scholar by Ralph Waldo Emerson. I'm Shurmila Mojumdar, Associate Professor, Department of English, University of Kalyani, West Bengal. Now, before we go into the text of The American Scholar, I will just like to refresh your memory about a few things. Ralph Waldo Emerson was one of the founding members of the transcendentalist movement in the United States of America. And transcendentalism is a kind of revolt against the puritanical hegemony as well as the rationality of the 18th century. In a way, transcendentalism is also a late flowering of the European romantic movement. So what he is trying to do in this essay is that he is trying to negotiate an American identity which will be free from all European influence, and he was trying to construct an ideal American whom he calls the American scholar. The American Scholar was a speech given by Ralph Waldo Emerson on August 31, 1837 to the Phi Beta Kappa Society at the First Parish in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Robert E. Spiller tells in Emerson's Problem of Vocation, a note on the American Scholar, quote, Emerson was variously priest, poet, and philosopher, but when he chose his own role, he defined himself as the American scholar. So you can see that Emerson was envisaging himself as the American scholar, an ideal person who is erudite, who is deep into studies, but who is also creative at the same time, and who is a man of action as well. The oration is an essay in definition of that role as it appeared to him in 1837. So the essay American Scholar, it was primarily delivered as a lecture, so it's an oration. The oration tries to define for himself who is an American scholar, what is the role of an American scholar, and how the American scholar achieve what he has set for himself. In May 34, Emerson wrote, imitation is the vice of over-civilized communities and the vice eminently of our times, of our literature, of our manners and social action. All American manners, language and writing are derivative. We do not write from facts, but we wish to state facts after the English manner. I think this is a very important observation by Emerson, and that was in 1835, and he delivered this oration in 1837. So the whole process was going on in his mind. The idea of American scholar was developing in his mind, and in the 18th century, that was a major concern in American literature, that it was too imitative, that it was too derivative, that it was too dependent upon what is happening across the Atlantic in their parent country. And sometimes, this transcendentalist movement has been described as the American Renaissance. And if you are familiar with F.O. Mathiassen's book, The American Renaissance, you know all about it. So the American Renaissance was primarily about constructing an American identity which will be free of the European influences. And that is how he was thinking in 1835, that all our manners, our social actions, our literature, everything about America is derivative, and it's time that America gets rid of this European influence and start to build something of our own. In January of 1836, concluding his course of lectures on English literature, he had acknowledged that, quote, the American scholar, unquote, must feel, quote, a degree of humiliation in reckoning how little his countrymen had, quote, added to the stock of truth for mankind, unquote, in comparison with the birds, the scholars, the philosophers of England. So you see, here is a clear admission that America is a new nation. America doesn't have much of history or cultural inheritance, nothing to talk about mythology, and America needed to build on her own experience, on the facts of American existence. And so long as America has existed, it has always looked towards England and towards its bards, its scholars, its philosophers, and he was consciously trying to develop an American identity which will be based on the American experience and the facts of American life as it is lived on the continent on the other side of the Atlantic. Though cast in negative terms, such passages unmistakably anticipate Emerson's ringing challenge to his countrymen in the peroration of the American scholar. American freemen have listened too long to the courtly muses of Europe. So you see, when he was talking about the derivative culture of America or the overwhelming influence of the European culture on the American life, he was definitely positing something negative, but he was very conscious that something very positive will come out of these negative thoughts, because once you realize that you are under the influence of an international influence, here it's the European influence, and you need to establish yourself as a nation, not only politically but culturally, literally, and in every sphere of life. You know how to go, you at least know that you have to try to find out ways and means to do it, and that is exactly Emerson was trying to do, to get rid of the European influence and start building an American culture, which I use as an umbrella term, which encompasses all walks of everyday life, not only scholarly but also popular life. So, in the Phi Beta Kappa oration, the first thing he is trying to do, Emerson is trying to do, is to define the American scholar. Who is an American scholar? Now, you see, something is interesting here. He is talking about the American scholar only, but he is not talking about scholar per se, because you see, scholar has a definite connotation all over the world, and he was not talking about the scholar only, he was talking about the American scholar. So this is something which is exclusive to America. Who is the scholar and what does he do and say? For whom and to whom does he speak? These are some of the questions he is trying to negotiate in the American scholar, and as you will see in the course of this lecture, that the scholar is not necessarily somebody who is erudite, who is well read, who immerses himself into studies only. He has to be a man of action, as Emerson put it. He has to be a man. He has to be a man thinking, and he has to be a man of action, involved in manual labor also, because that will in a way give him a clear idea about the American life as it is lived, and not something which is derived from the books. Emerson sees the scholar as a watcher, preparing himself for still undefined service to come. In 1835, he describes the scholar ideally as a writer of genius who sees, thinks and speaks for and to other men. In 1836, he particularly emphasizes the scholar's relation with nature and society. By the summer of 1837, having already formulated most of the basic concepts underlying the American scholar, Emerson was prepared to write the oration itself during a relatively brief period of concentrated effort. So, you have seen the chronology of the writing of this oration. In 1835, he formulated some of the ideas. In 1836, he was even closer to the idea of the American scholar, and in 1837, he finally delivered the lecture. So, one of his primary preoccupation was the American scholar's relation to nature. And may I point out, this preoccupation with the relation to nature is one of the major preoccupations of the Romantics in Europe. and it has been one of the major preoccupations of the transcendentalists in America as well. So nature plays a vital role in shaping a human personality, in the conduct of human life, day-to-day life, in his intellectual life, in his emotional life as well. So that transcendentalism is a late flowering of European Romanticism becomes clear from the fact that Emerson's primary preoccupation, at least one of the major preoccupations in this oration, is man's relationship to nature. The scholar as watcher. The scholar at first appears variously as a reader of books, a writer, a teacher, a studious man. The scholar must feel a degree of uneasiness, a soreness that drives him into solitude. It's a painful conflict between his wish for companionship and his doom of solitude, a mingled revulsion and devotion to the confined life of the scholar. So you see, that has been the predicament of the scholar all over the world, and that is what is expected of the scholar also all over the world, that he should be a reader of books, that he should be a writer, that he should be a teacher, that he should be a studious man. And the doom that he is alone in his pursuits, that he doesn't have many people to communicate with, and has been the predicament of the scholar all over the world. And Emerson was particularly trying to address this problem, because you see, he was not conceiving of the American scholar as a studious man only, as he himself puts it into this essay, that he should not be a bookworm. So he should have a day-to-day interaction with common people, their everyday chores, and that is why that is how he can come out of this doom of being solitary and actually establish his communication with the rest of the society. So the scholar needs to open up communication with nature as much as with the society around him. As a representative to society of the intellectual man, the scholar must be felt free to make his own discoveries as an observer or seer, or to report his own conclusions as a thinker and would-be actor. So what he is arguing is, the scholar is an intellectual, no doubt about it, and there is this idea that the intellectuals live in a different world. They stand on a podium which the ordinary people cannot reach, but the American scholar is expected to come out to this glass house. The American scholar is expected to be a seer, an observer, and he should draw his own conclusions about society, about ordinary life, about life on the American soil, and that is how he will be an would-be actor, that he will be a man of action. He will be a man thinking as well as he will be a man of action, and that is what is expected of the American scholar, and that is why Emerson emphasizes that the doom of solitariness is something that has to be overcome by the American scholar. The true scholar shows himself as a philosopher in his plan of study, not merely a trader in science and literature or a hired workman for the booksellers. So you see the originality of his work, that bookworms are merely receivers of knowledge which has been created by somebody else. The scholar is not supposed to be a bookworm. A scholar is supposed to be a creator of knowledge himself. So he will create knowledge, and which is, again, I think the implication is knowledge as it is derived from his experience of the American life, because what he has read in the books, it was that knowledge was created by maybe somebody like Aristotle or Plato, who lived more than 2000 years ago in a faraway place like Greece. So the knowledge that the American scholar is expected to create will also be specific to America. As the natural scholar stands above mere readers, so the true scholar stands forth in the company of genius as a modern Milton, a truth teller, a teacher, a leader pointing to the future. So this comparison with Milton is particularly important because if you think of Shakespeare, Shakespeare was not really a teacher. He was a playwright, he wrote plays, and we in the English department and comparative literature departments, we have made it into a teacher, but which he was not. But Milton was actually a teacher and a preacher and a leader who tried to tell the truth as he perceived it. So Emerson felt that the American scholar must be more akin to Milton in his various roles as truth teller, as a teacher, as a leader, and the received knowledge must also be in a way coordinated with the kind of knowledge that he creates. And so the knowledge that will be made available to the American people will not only be the received knowledge, but also the knowledge that has been created by the American scholar. The scholar realizes that nature is the opposite of his soul, answering to it part for part. One is seal, the other is print. The beauty of nature is the beauty of his mind. Nature becomes to him the measure of his own attainments. Well, you see how nature becomes a friend, philosopher and guide. If you remember your Tintern Abbey or the Intimation Ode, you know how Wordsworth conceived of nature as mother, as friend, as philosopher, and a nurse, a friend, a hand which has been extended by her to hold in times of difficulty. So Emerson was kind of envisaging that role of nature in human life, that nature becomes an agency which imparts education, nature becomes an agency which imparts wisdom, nature becomes an agency which extends her hand in times of difficulty, gives you some kind of advice how to deal with it. So nature plays a very important role in the life of human beings as Emerson conceived it. The ancient precept, know thyself, and the modern precept, study nature, has become one maxim. Now, it is the Greek philosophers who for whom this ancient precept was important, the ancient precept of know thyself. If you come to India, our own scholars also preach the same thing, Atmanang Vidhi, which means know thyself. So how do you know thyself? If you know nature, then only you know thyself, and or at least in the process of knowing thyself, it's very important that you know nature. And so that is how in Emerson, know thyself and study nature become one maxim. The second great educative influence on the spirit of the scholar is the mind of the past. Books are a record of the immortal truths discovered by scholars of the past. But it is also necessary to realize that books do not have a value and validity for all times to come. As we are talking about it, that he expressed, scholars should not merely be bookworms. Books are necessary, but what is important, how do you use books? If you simply read books, fold it and place it back to the shelf, it is absolutely of no use. It only becomes useful if you read books, if you have access to past knowledge and use that knowledge to discover things for yourself. Because as he says that books do not have a value and validity for all times to come. So if you have knowledge from the past, if you have access to knowledge which the ancient scholars have gathered, and you can use it in a way so that your society benefits, that your countrymen benefits, that you yourself benefit, therein lies the best use of the books. So books are important so long as you use them properly. Books are not so important if they are simply printed pages bound together to be taken out from the shelf, read and taken back to the shelf. Emerson's repeated insistence on originality and creativity is concurrent with his emergence as an independent thinker, writer and public speaker, known for his own distinctive style and voice, confident in his own insight. Books are the best of things well used, but they are among the worst of things if misused. So, he is talking about slavery to books. The metaphor is important. So, when it becomes a slavery, it's not that important and it's not even good sometimes, but when you can use it in your own way, use it in a very useful way which benefits everybody else in the society, and then only you are free from the slavery to books, and then only the books become useful. Emerson points out that it is wrong to suppose that the scholar is a recluse, a kind of invalid unfit for any handwork or public labor. A scholar must also be a man of action. Action may have secondary importance for him, but is essential. Without action, his thoughts can never ripen into truth. The American scholar must recognize the dignity and necessity of manual labor. Well, I am reminded of a novel by Somerset Maugham which is called The Razor's Edge. There is the character of Larry who went in search of eternal wisdom to India, and he was a disciple to one of the very well-known gurus of India, but after he returned, he realized that all this knowledge has not been properly digested by him because of simple lack of manual labor. So he spent some time in manual labor, which is kind of unthinking manual labor, to give him some time, some space, some rejuvenation of his thinking ability, so that he can go back to the wisdom that he has gathered from India. So you see, he also insists, Emerson also insists that the scholar must be a man of action. So you can see how he is constructing the role of the scholar, that how he can get himself out of the glass house so that the doom of solitariness does not befall him. And how can he do that? He has to come out. And how does he come out? He come out into public life, he come out into popular life, he take part in the actions that ordinary people perform. So he uses an extended metaphor in this text where he says that we think our head is the most important part of the body, but it's not really that. If you don't have your hands, what is the use of your brain? So you have been able to think so much, but you won't be able to write it down. If you don't have your mouth, you can't speak to other people. And so every part of the body is as important as the other part. So every person belonging to different professions, different callings, coming from different walks of life, they are as important as the scholar in perfect fabric of social life. And to achieve this, it is necessary that the scholar goes out into public life, partakes of manual labor, becomes one of the huge mass of American population who are not so, some of whom are not even literate, some of are not very well educated, people who earn their livelihood by manual work, but they are all integral part of the American society. And if the American scholar does not leave anything for these people to benefit from, where is the justification of the existence of an American scholar? So the American scholar should be an ideal man, a perfect man who can partake of all kinds of activities, intellectual as well as manual. The one thing in the world of value, the active soul. The first duty of the scholar is to cheer, to raise, and to guide men by showing them facts amidst appearances. The scholar is a man who raises himself above private considerations and lives on public and illustrious thoughts. The scholar is the world's eye and also the world's heart. So that kind of sums up his idea of a man thinking, that he is the eye as well as the heart. So he partakes of manual work in public life, and he also thinks. But where is his advantage? What happens? Ordinary people, they can only do manual work, and the American scholar is a notch above them because he can do a manual labor as well as he can indulge in intellectual engagement, and that is what is expected of him, so that he can kind of execute a kind of bond with ordinary people, so that his wisdom, his knowledge becomes their wisdom and their knowledge as well. Emerson is expressing his ideal vision of true scholar, the American scholar, as an influential spiritual mentor, speaking not in the tradition but as prompted by his own insight and revelation, actively leading men out of bondage to the faded past into a new relation to their own world of the living present. The true scholar, like the true preacher, deals out to the people his life passed through the fire of thought. So you see, the lived experience becomes very important. So not only the kind of knowledge or wisdom you received from the past master, but also the kind of knowledge and wisdom you yourself experience through the fire of thought. So lived experience is important, and if the American scholar, which is a true scholar, who is a true scholar, the American scholar share his own lived experiences and knowledge and wisdom that he has gained from his lived experiences with his countrymen, and free them from the bondage of the, as he describes it, the faded past, then he has actually fulfilled his role, he has fulfilled his kind of justified his existence as an American scholar. The American scholar, as he argues, must bring about a revolution in literary taste, and now let's see what does he mean by that. The literature of the poor, the feelings of the child, the philosophy of the street, the meaning of household life, these are the topics of the new age. The American scholar must contribute his bit to the ushering in of such an age of golden possibilities. The perception of the worth of the low and the vulgar is a welcome development. Now again we go back to some of the precepts of Romantic movement. If you remember the preface to the Lyrical Ballads, that is exactly what Wordsworth was preaching, isn't it? That the ordinary man, their ordinary life, even the language that they used in their day-to-day conversation should be made a part of poetic tradition. And Emerson is trying to argue the same thing, because if you look at 18th century America, you will find the most important and the most voluminous body of work came from the dissertation writers, the essay writers, the preachers. So creative work was comparatively less in number compared to the essay and dissertations that were being written by the church fathers and Puritan scholars and all that. And so American Renaissance was trying to usher in an era of golden possibility where marginal voices, like the voice of the child, like the voice of the man on the street, and the voice of the women, who were completely relegated to obscurity in most 18th century literature, and not only in America but also in England. So these voices should be recognized, that these voices should be represented, these voices should be given proper hearing too. So what was still considered to be low and the vulgar is to be put into relief in American literature, and you see, in a way that will contribute to the constitution of the American identity, because America will be one of the nations who will hear to all the marginal voices, bring the periphery to the center, as we may argue. So there will be an exchange between the periphery and the center, and thereby America will emerge as a modern nation. As man thinking, the scholar must be neither traditional nor imitative, nor merely nationalistic, but truly original. Creation is always the style and act of men of genius, in whom the good human soul speaks because it has something new to say. So style is the man, if you believe in Bacon, and Emerson believes that the man thinking, he should not be again a slave to tradition, to the cultural baggage that has come down to America through its European birth. And it should also not merely be nationalistic. But this is very important. You see, so far he has been talking about the American scholar, and you may think that he is thinking about only America, and he is thinking about the interests of America that he has in mind, and so the American scholar will serve only the American people. But he now comes beyond that boundary, and he says it should not merely be nationalistic, but it should truly be original. And so creation is not imitation, creation is not continuing only with a tradition. Creation is the style and act of men of genius, by which he means probably that men of genius, they can strike out their own ways, they can strike out their own paths to create, and so this will become the most important contribution of the scholars, that it will cross the national boundary, that it will become universal, and if it crosses this national boundary and if it becomes universal, the only requirement is that it has to be original. So it should not be derivative, it should not be imitative. The men of genius should be in a position to strike out their own path, so that what they create can be disseminated to people all over the world. The great man makes the great thing. The American scholar should have confidence in the unexplored might of man. The scholar must carry out his noble task with patience, courage, and determination. And I think here Emerson is trying to talk about something which the men of Renaissance in America have been trying to do, that they are trying to explore the possibilities of democracy in a new nation which had never had the taste of monarchy. So they were not freeing themselves from the chains of monarchy, but they were also trying to, because that didn't apply in their case, but they are trying to explore the possibilities of democracy, how it can give life to American people, where they will be free, where they will be free to realize their possibilities. So there will be no hierarchy, there will be absolute social mobility. So these are some of the ideas with which they were working, and that is why he says that the task of an American scholar is to explore the might of man, which has so far been not so extensively explored by writers of or thinkers or scholars of the earlier generation. Throughout his effort, self-reliance and courage, the scholar must bring about the union of man and with nature and God. If this can be done, an American people will walk on their own feet, will work with their own hands, and will speak their own mind. A nation of man will for the first time exist because each believes himself inspired by the divine soul, which also inspires all men. And now we will have to note that Emerson has talked about the oversoul, by which he means divine soul, which is which everybody can access. Every individual, a perceptive individual, a thinking individual has access to this oversoul. And I think this is some kind of interrogation of the Puritanic hegemony that the transcendentalists were trying to do. So there is a divine soul, there is an oversoul, and which everybody can access, and that is how he imagined that America will be the first nation to exist where every individual, as Whitman put it metaphorically, every leaf of grass will matter, will contribute, and will be a part of whole which will be independent, self-reliant, free, liberal, and will realize the possibilities of the individual. As he says, the world is nothing, it's man. Man is all. So world is nothing. What does he mean by that? So the external world is what the man makes of it. So that way, your interaction with nature is not only the physical nature, what you make of nature, that becomes very important also.